Hi, I'm Pam, and today I am ranking Metroidvanias. A lot of Metroidvanias. Metroidvanias are one of my favorite genres out there, and today I am going to be ranking all of the Metroidvanias I've played, which is over 100 of them. This is somewhat of a remake/remaster of a video I made back in 2021. My camera betrayed me in that video, and the frame rate on it is nauseating. I've always wanted to remake it, and now I have more than 50 extra games to talk about, and that's a lot of bonus content. Before we get to the actual rankings, let's answer the question, what is a Metroidvania? Metroidvania is generally considered a subgenre of the 2D action platformer, though not all Metroidvanias are 2D, and they're not necessarily platformers. The important thing is that they have large, interconnected maps that are ability gated. You will find areas that you can't yet access until you get a new ability, and the more abilities you have, the more you can explore. They also tend to be non-linear, and you can explore in many different directions. Metroidvanias tend to have a lot of backtracking to areas you've previously visited, and exploring and getting to know the world is very important. Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night are generally considered to be the grandfathers of the genre, though of course there are games earlier than those who do have examples of these mechanics. I also just wanted to talk about my own personal taste in Metroidvanias, so you have an idea of if my rankings will be applicable to you or not. When it comes to ranking these games, the very first most important thing is how does it feel to play. If it doesn't feel good to play, if the controls aren't good, I probably don't want to play it. Exploration is the next most important thing. I want a world that is fun to explore, well-designed, and full of secrets and shortcuts. I love really getting to know a game world, opening new paths and learning more about them, and seeing areas I can't access yet and wondering how and when I'll be able to. A good in-menu map is also very important to keep track of where I have been and where I haven't yet. I do, of course, have opinions on a game's art and music, though those things are rarely enough to sway my ranking of a game in one way or another. And generally, in this genre, I think the less story, the better. These are action games, not talking games, and I can definitely be turned off by too much dialogue in a game. I also enjoy when a game tries to do new things mechanically, though I'm also perfectly happy to play a game that just does the basics really well. Since there are so many games to rank this time around, I did increase the number of ranks just to sort of help differentiate between the better rankings in the genre. I'll just go over those so you know what I mean by them. F rank is a failure. This is a game that I think is bad and brought me no joy. A D rank is a game that has some kind of major flaw, usually bad controls. It might have a couple redeeming factors or two, but it's something I wouldn't recommend or want to play any more of myself. C is a mediocre game. It either has roughly equal parts good and bad, or it's just very meh. B is a solid game. I definitely have some criticisms of it, but I'm happy to have played it, and I generally recommend anything on this list that is B rank or above. B+ is a good game with less criticisms of it. A is a very good game. Everything here and above are what I consider to be best in class in the genre. A and above are also games where I likely wanted to go for 100%. A+ is a very, very great game, but just something keeps it out of my top tier, and the S rank are my personal favorites and the types of games that keep me in love with this genre. One last note, I am ranking these games as Metroidvanias specifically. There are some games on this list that I consider decent in their own rights, but pretty bad at being Metroidvanias. Alright, let's get started. I'm going to be going through these all alphabetically, because that's how I like to do things, and the first game is 8 Doors Arum's Afterlife Adventure. This game is by Rootless Studio, and it came out in 2021. It is a fairly story-heavy game based on Korean folktales. You enter the afterlife in order to find your father's soul. The art style of this game can be rather striking in some places with pops of red. However, it does tend to start getting feeling a little samey with very sort of gray and brownish backgrounds that sometimes make it difficult to tell the background from the foreground. The controls are decent and combat feels alright, but every enemy hits just a little too hard and takes a couple too many hits to die. The platforming segments can also be quite tedious and punishing, and the save points are fairly far apart. There was just a bunch of little things in this game that made me not enjoy it that much and put it down after a few hours. So 8 Doors Arum's Afterlife adventure gets a C. Aestik was released by Hooded Traveler Games and released in 2024. I found this to be a very by-the-numbers Metroidvania. The one thing that it does differently is that it gives you some moral decisions to make in dealing with other characters, which can result in different events happening throughout the story. Most things about it are just fine, like the combat, the movement, the platforming, and the art. But it also doesn't really do anything to stand out. My biggest complaint about this game is the level design. Every area seems very large and drawn out, and some obstacles are placed in odd spots that will hurt you. The fast travel is also very far apart and barely useful. I got about halfway through this game and then just never really felt compelled to pick it up again, so Aestik is also going to be getting a C. Aeterna Noctis is by Aeternum Game Studios and released in 2021. This is the hardest Metroidvania that I've ever played, with some very creative and sadistic platforming challenges to it. It uses very interesting abilities like shooting arrows and teleporting to them. The game does take a little bit to get going. The beginning is a bit too linear, and getting the bow and arrow, which doesn't happen for a couple hours, really opens up the game. It has a huge world to explore and includes some of the most creative levels I've seen in a Metroidvania. There is a very maze-like puzzle area, which is a lot of fun. At least to me, it's kind of controversial in terms of what other people think. And there's also, my favorite area is out in space, and you're dealing with differing gravity of planets. The bosses are also very fun and challenging and require a lot of platforming as well. There's lots to collect, and the gameplay is constantly evolving, meant that I was always having a good time. My biggest complaint is that it has the most punishing death mechanic I've ever seen in a game, which I think is completely unnecessary because the game is punishing in other ways. However, overcoming all of the challenges this game had my way was very satisfying, so Aeterna Noctis is getting an A. Afterimage is developed by Oregon Shanghai and came out in 2023. This is an expansive game, definitely more Castlevania inspired, that focuses on character builds and equipment and has a good balance of combat and platforming. There is too much story, and the story is absolute nonsense, so I did end up fast forwarding through most of it, but it does have a pretty art style, and I very much enjoyed the fantasy world. I also really liked trying out different weapons and builds, and I liked that the game allowed me to play how I wanted it. There was lots of items to discover and use and craft, and the world was just huge and fun to explore, so Afterimage is going to get a B+. Aggelos is by Storybird Games, and it came out in 2018. This is a very Wonder Boy influenced. It's a very retro styled game, both in the way it looks and in the mechanics and the way it plays. You play a guy with a sword trying to save the princess and the kingdom. It's a fairly linear game with gameplay that is on the basic side. It does play like a Genesis game. Better controls than a Genesis game. One thing I really did not enjoy about this game was that there is no map, and it is also punishing in a retro sense, with save points that are very, very far away from bosses, and you lose your XP when you die. I played through the first few dungeons of this and found my interest just waning as I got further and further through the game. Another thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is that I like retro games. I don't like new games that play like retro games. So Aggelos is not for me. It gets a D. Anima Flux is developed by Avantage Prim and it came out in 2024. This is a co-op Metroidvania. You can also play it solo, though all of my experience with it has been in co-op. In this game, you have one melee character and one ranged character, and in terms of combat, neither of them are a whole lot of fun. The melee character has very little in the way of defense, so they often ends up just getting their faces eaten by enemies. The ranged character can get a little bit of distance, but I found as I played, my shots seemed to get weaker and weaker as the game went on, and they also really root you in place. The game is in desperate need of some kind of dodge ability, which you do get, but not until like halfway through the game when frustration has already long ago set in. The game has a pretty confusing map. It's not just one 2D plane, it's going through buildings, and it's just a giant mess of elevators that make it take longer to get anywhere than it needs to. The fast travel system also doesn't work very well, and one thing that was really annoying is that you have to pay to refill your health potions, which I only got one of, your special ammo, your armor. You have to pay at specific charging stations to refill them, and they're pretty rare to find those, so you rarely get to use those things. Also, you have special grenades of different types. Again, you have to go equip those at a specific machine. You can't just change them while you're out exploring the world. I also find the dialogue in this game extremely irritating. I do not like the characters, and overall, this game really wasn't a good time at all, so it's going in D. Animal Well is by Billy Basso and it came out in 2024. This is a very unique puzzle-forward game that doesn't give you much story, and it just throws you in and asks you to figure things out for yourself. I love the aesthetic of this game. It has a gorgeous, dark, pastel pixel art and a very haunting score. The overall movement in the game is fairly basic, but the items that you get are really, really interesting and delightful when you realize all of the different ways that you can use them. This game is just a delight, and it's full of aha moments that made me feel really smart when I figured out those different ways that I could use items. It also goes fairly deep in that there's a lot more puzzles that you can do even after you reach the final credits, but even just reaching the credits, which is what I did, gives an excellent time and an excellent Metroidvania, so Animal Well is getting an A+. The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human is by YCJY Games, and it came out in 2016. In this game, humanity has died out, and you travel around in a submarine trying to figure out exactly what's happened. This is really a boss rush game. There's not a whole lot else to do. You basically just have to go around until you find a boss, then you fight a boss, and you also find notes just to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the world. The boss fights do feature lots of one-hit kills, which is fairly annoying, especially since there are no fights out in the world in order to practice combat. I do think this goes in the Metroidvania category because you do get new abilities that let you progress further in the world, mostly to find new bosses that also increase your combat ability, but since I like the exploration aspect of Metroidvanias, this thing just was not for me, so Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human is going in D. Astalon Tears of the Earth was developed by Labworks and it came out in 2021. This is a retro-styled game where you play as 3 different characters, each with their own unique abilities, and you all must climb to the top of a tower to take on an evil boss. I really like this game's unique character switching mechanic. You play as a warrior, a mage, and an archer, and each character is capable of different things like magic switches or breaking walls or wall jump, so you need to switch between them in order to surpass certain obstacles. The thing I love most about this game is the tower itself. It is just an absolute joy to explore. It is full of secrets and shortcuts, and lots of rooms have little puzzles to do that reward you in some way. This game also has an abundance of items to find, which all gives you new abilities or allows you to surpass a certain obstacle. And an interesting thing about it is that when you die, you sort of go back to the beginning of the tower where you get to spend your XP on upgrades, and then you have to get back to where you were, which isn't Annoying, as you might think, because there is an elevator system that basically works as a fast travel, so you can get back there fairly quickly. Honestly, this game just has one of the most satisfying environments to explore in any game. Bosses are on the easy side, but Astalon Tears of the Earth is one of my absolute favorites, and it goes in S. Axoim Verge is by Thomas Happ Games and came out in 2020. Nope. Axoim Verge is by Thomas Happ Games and came out in 2015. This is a very Metroid-inspired game. It has a quite complex story that I honestly didn't pay that much attention to. I think what stands out about it is the nice variety of weapons to find, and there are also lots of secrets, some of which can be a little complicated to figure out, making use of a strange, scanning ability you have in the game. Honestly, it's been about 10 years since I played this. Yeah, I think this is a solid, if not a standout game for me, especially at this point. But yeah, it's a solid B rank. Axoim Verge 2, on the other hand, this one, also by Thomas Happ Games, came out in 2022, and it is very mechanically different than the first game. Whereas in the first one, you had a wide variety of weapons to use to make combat fun. Here, you get one clunky melee attack and a boomerang for ranged, and that's basically it. There's no real reward to participating in the combat in this game, but enemies are plenty enough that they do get in the way of exploring if that's what you want to do. I also find the map in this game very difficult to read. It goes into a lot of detail, but it's very pixelated and low resolution, so it's hard to make out what any of those details are. I also found that the abilities in this game were not very intuitive. When I would get a new one, I generally didn't know what kind of obstacle it would allow me to pass, which made it difficult to go back to the obstacles that you needed to get past. So yeah, Axoim Verge 2 was not a game that I liked at all, and it's going in D. Next up is Batman Arkham Asylum, which is our first 3D Metroidvania on the list. This is by Rocksteady, and it came out in 2010. This, as far as I am concerned, is the only one of the Arkham series that falls into the Metroidvania category. You are on an island, and you get access to more of it as you gain new abilities. This game has very satisfying, crunchy Batman combat, and there are lots of secrets and little puzzles. The Riddler trophies in particular were very fun goals to go for. The game just does a really good job of combining stealth, combat, exploration, puzzles, and it really does well at everything, so Batman Arkham Asylum is an A. BioGun is by Dapper Dog Digital, and it came out in 2024. In this game, a virus is threatening all of pets as we know them, and you play a vaccine injected into a dog and trying to take the virus out. This is a very bright, colorful, and upbeat game with a very fun soundtrack. It also has a lot of dog puns, so if you're into puns, definitely something to look out for. This is more of a run and gun style game, and definitely has a little bit more of a combat than a platforming focus. There are lots of guns as well as augments and upgrades to find for your character, and also a really cool and fun series of enzymes that are temporary bonuses, like letting you breathe underwater or turning you into a bomb, and the way you use and collect those can be a little bit puzzly. The boss fights are also a really fun challenge, and the game isn't too punishing when it comes to deaths, so BioGun is getting an A. Blasphemous is developed by the Game Kitchen and came out in 2019. This is an absolutely gorgeous game with a Spanish Catholic setting, amazing soundtrack, and it has beautiful, detailed, and gruesome pixel art. This game is very deliberate in its movement and combat. The Penitent one isn't the most agile hero out there, but still very fun to control once you get used to it. The map in this game is absolutely gorgeous, and I loved exploring every zone. There's a ton of enemy variety, and each one has an awesome execute animation for you when you finish it off. The abilities that you get in this more impact the world around you than how your character moves, which does make this a little different than how a lot of Metroidvanias tackle things, but I very much enjoyed it. I also think the lore is very interesting. The NPCs are great and look amazing. There are some collectibles for collectibles' sake, but I love how you get them and how you display them, and there are tons of upgrades to find to augment your character. Blasphemous just has like the most impeccable vibes, and the gameplay is great too, and it is also an S rank. Blasphemous 2 had a follow-up by the Game Kitchen in 2023, and this is a strange example of a game that is mechanically probably better in every area than the first game, yet I still don't like it quite as much. The movement in this one is a lot more fluid. There are also 3 different weapons that you get. You choose one to begin with, though you do get the rest over the course of the game. And these weapons not only function different in combat, but also give you different movement abilities to explore with. Despite how good the gameplay is, this just somehow doesn't hit as hard as the first game. Aesthetically, it's a little bit lacking. There's just a little less detail in the backgrounds. Enemies have a common execute animation rather than having a different one for every enemy. It's still a very, very good game, just didn't quite reach the heights of Blasphemous 1, but Blasphemous 2 is still getting an A. Blast Brigade versus the Evil Legion of Dr. Cread is quite a mouthful. It is from My Games, and it came out in 2022. You play a team of heroes, and this is basically a spy thriller of a video game. I overall liked this one. There are interesting weapons and abilities, like grapples and teleporters to help you explore the island you're on. It has a fun, cartoony look and pretty silly dialogue. I did find this a fairly difficult game. I thought the map could be a little better, like by letting you mark things, and enemies could be just a little less spongy. Save points could be a little further together, but overall, this is a solid Metroidvania, so Blast Brigade is getting a B. Blaster Master was developed by Sunsoft, and it came out in 1988. This is a very early example of the genre, and you play a young boy who follows his frog into a hole and then winds up with a magical tank, which, okay. The levels alternate between a 2D platformer in your tank and more overhead action sequences as you find dungeons to go through. The 2D tank levels are where the Metroidvania elements come in. You are gated by different abilities that your tank needs, and you do need to backtrack and visit areas sort of out of order. I don't love the top-down levels, but I do quite enjoy the tanky levels, but overall Blaster Master, as a Metroidvania specifically, is just okay, so I'm going to give it a C. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is developed by Artplay, and it came out in 2019. This is the spiritual successor to the Igavania Castlevania games and has Igarashi at the helm of it. This game does take a little bit of a kitchen sink approach by taking all of the Castlevanias and kind of mushing them all into one thing. Like, there's a lot of mechanics. There's cooking, there's side quests, there's ability shards, there's farming, there's outfits. I found it a little too much, but honestly, I found it easy enough to ignore the aspects I wasn't that interested in. I did find the castle in this game very fun to explore, and I really liked all of the abilities you get. The music is also fantastic. It's not the most challenging game, as I generally find Castlevania games aren't, just because of all of the items you can use in boss fights and things, but I do find that the enemies in this game are very amusing. I don't love the art style, or at least the combination of art styles. It feels like between the background, foreground, and characters, you've got 3 different things going on. Still, that doesn't have too much of an impact on me. I was motivated to 100% this game, so Bloodstained is getting an A. Carrion is by Phobia Game Studio and came out in 2020. This game has a very interesting concept where rather than fighting the monsters, you are the monster. You are a monster who is rampaging through a science facility and just tearing apart all the scientists. As you progress, you grow and get new abilities. You can change size, which is one of your main ways of getting through various things like small pipes or big doors. One thing I did not love about this is that there is no in-game map, which did make it fairly difficult to navigate. I did find myself lost in this game quite a bit. The areas all sort of blended together, and though I really like the idea of this, I didn't love the execution, so Carrion is getting a C. Alright, now I have a whole bunch of Castlevania games, and I'm going to go through these in the order I played them, as opposed to strict alphabetical order. And the first one is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is by Konami, and it came out in 1997, and I love this game. I love the pixel art, I love the music, I love how Alucard moves. The castle in this game is just an absolute joy to explore and full of creative and interesting little touches like the confessionals. The environments are just very cool and distinctive, and they really just drip with atmosphere. Honestly, the only complaint I really have about this game is that there's a little too much inventory, but that's not that big of a deal. This game is a classic for a reason, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night gets an S tier. The next Castlevania game I finished was Aria of Sorrow. This is also by Konami, came out in 2003. This is a lot like Symphony, and some people judge it for that, but I think if you're going to emulate a game, you may as well emulate a great one. I found this game controlled very well. I really liked the castle, the level design, and the music in it. I enjoyed the soul ability, which lets you absorb abilities from monsters. That is the kind of ability that could get into the farming requirement, which some of the other games get into, but at least in my playthrough, I didn't find I ever needed to farm anything. I was fine with not getting everything. I found everything I needed in order to get through the game. I really like this, and it is my favorite of the handheld Castlevania games that I've played. So, Aria of Sorrow gets an A. Which one's Aria of Sorrow? I think this one's Aria of Sorrow? I hope so. Aria of Sorrow gets an A. Next, I played Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, also by Konami. This one came out in 2002. I thought that this game was pretty decent. It has different spell books that you can use in combat. I did find the map in this game a little bit confusing with the two sort of overlapping castles to travel between. But I thought it was like a solid take on trying to recreate the magic of Symphony, if not being overly memorable. So Harmony of Dissonance is going to get a B. I think this is Harmony of Dissonance. Castlevania Circle of the Moon came out in 2001, and I hate this game. When I first got the GBA collection, I was like, I'll start at the beginning. I started this. I played it for 5 minutes, went, nope, these controls suck, and I think went to Aria of Sorrow instead. But after I finished the other two, I was like, okay, let's go back to it and see what we can do. I still hated it the second time I played it. Nathan Graves is very sluggish. His whip feels bad. He's also very annoying and whiny. It does have a kind of neat card combining system, which gives you different abilities, but I did find that in order to get things, I would have needed to farm, and farming is bullshit, and I refuse to do it. I also find the level design in this game kind of sucks. A lot of just long hallways to like a heart container, and then have to go back through the long hallway. Yeah, I don't like Castlevania Circle of the Moon at all, and it's getting a D. And the last of the handheld Castlevanias I have played is A Dawn of Sorrow. This one came out in 2005. This is a sequel to Aria of Sorrow. You get to absorb abilities from enemies, but there's also a magic seal system that was used because of the DS, so it wanted to use the little touchpad thing. It sort of acts like QuickTime events on consoles, which are honestly pretty annoying. However, I liked this game overall. It did kind of blend in with the games that came before it. In fact, I find all of the Castlevania handheld games just start blending together the more of them you play, which is why I still have 2 that I haven't played yet. But Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow is fine. It's gonna get a B. Now we come to Cathedral, which is by December Born Interactive, and it came out in 2019. This is a very retro-styled game. You explore dungeons and towns, you talk to people. It's a fairly large world. It definitely controls better than the 8 and 16-bit games that inspire it. However, I found it very difficult and far too punishing in a way that made me not really want to play anymore. You lose your money when you die, and it's very easy to die. The save points are very far apart. The healing stations, which are separate, are very far apart. The upgrades that you get in this game are so minor that they don't really feel like they're helping you when you run into difficulties with platforming segments or bosses. And overall, I just found Cathedral far more frustrating than it was fun, so this is going in D. Chasm is a game by BitKid Inc. and it came out in 2018. This is a very standard go explore the dungeon and prove your worth as a knight kind of game. The weird thing about this game is the map is procedurally generated with every new game, and it definitely feels like it. The best Metroidvanias for me have very deliberately crafted maps, and this obviously does not. The combat's fine, the platforming is fine, abilities are decent, music art fine, but the world just feels so unspecial and random, and if you can't craft a world for me to explore, then why should I want to explore it? So this is the very definition of a game for me, so Chasm gets a C. Chronicles of the Wolf is developed by Megami Games and came out in 2025. This is a very Simon's Quest inspired game. There is a day and night cycle, and you need to listen to what townspeople say in order to know what the hell you're supposed to be doing. I found the starting areas of this game pretty lacking, but they got significantly better once you reached a castle area that was much more fun to explore with a lot of interesting items and abilities to collect. Overall, though, I just found that this game went way too hard on the nostalgia. The controls were a little stiff, the button mapping didn't make a lot of sense, there were points that would instantly kill you, the map was very unintuitive and kind of hard to use, so Chronicles of the Wolf is gonna get a C. Cookie Cutter is developed by Subcult Joint and it came out in 2023. You play a cyborg who is out for revenge after something happened to her creator and lover. One thing I love about this game is that your companion is your vagina who talks to you, and I've never seen that in a game before. The first half of this game was a solid B. It looks good, it has cool character designs, and lots of very bloody combat. However, throughout the whole thing, the controls did feel a little bit sloppy. In combat, I'd often get to a point where I'd have an enemy to a place where I could execute them, and I'd be spamming the execute button, and instead she'd just be punching something else beside them. Also, with the platforming, things didn't feel responsive enough. This wasn't too big of a deal in the first half of the game. However, in the second half of the game, you get to platforming places with instant kill spikes, and then the controls kind of became a deal breaker for me. So for that reason, Cookie Cutter is going in C. Crypt Custodian is by Kyle Thompson and released in 2024, and in this game you play a cat who has been tasked with cleaning up the afterlife. This game somehow made top-down platforming feel great with some really nice visual touches as well as fun abilities. The game has a big map that is a lot of fun to explore with a lot of secrets to find and little challenges to accomplish. The story and characters are very charming, and this is one of the few games in the genre where I actually looked forward to reading some dialogue. This isn't an overly difficult game, but it is just a very pleasant, chill game that I very much enjoyed my time with, so Crypt Custodian is getting an A. Curse of the Sea Rats is by P-Toon Studio and it came out in 2023. This is a game with absolutely gorgeous hand-drawn art where you play a pirate crew who has all been turned into rats. You play as and upgrade 4 different characters, and this does offer co-op for up to 4 characters, and this was one of my biggest disappointments in the last few years. I really looked forward to being able to play this couch co-op, but the controls in this game are just terrible. The combat is laggy and the platforming is imprecise. When playing in co-op, if player 2 goes out of range for something small, like 3 or 5 seconds, they just die. As I said at the beginning of the video, how a game feels to play is the most important thing, and Curse of the Sea Rats feels bad. So it is getting the first F. Here's a quick close-up of the rankings after our first 3 letters of the alphabet. Dandara is by Long Hat House and came out in 2018. The first time I played this game, I honestly bounced off it immediately. It has a very unique control scheme where you have to launch yourself between platforms to move. There's no walking or running or jumping, and I didn't think it was for me. However, earlier this year, I came back to it and did manage to find some enjoyment in it. The game has very beautiful pixel art, the world is full of secrets, as well as challenges and upgrades to find. I do find that death is rather punishing. You drop your XP when you die, which I don't love, and the save points are fairly far apart, though there is a very excellent difficulty option where you have the option to just add more saves to the world without changing anything else, which I thought was a really excellent idea. However, even though I was enjoying it for a few hours, as I got further into the game and things started to get harder, the staccato kind of movement started to become an annoyance again. You know, sometimes when you're just exploring for secrets or backtracking, you just want to go fast, and with this movement scheme and the kind of enemies involved in the game, that wasn't really possible, so Dandara is gonna get a C. Death's Gambit Afterlife is developed by White Rabbit and it came out in 2018. People call so many Metroidvanias Souls-like, and most of the time I disagree with them. This is a Souls-like. There are multiple classes to choose from, different weapons to specialize in, limited use heals that refill after you save or die, you have a stamina meter to manage, and there's crafting and items that you're encouraged to use often. I overall enjoyed this game. I think the art is very nice, the world is vast, and the boss fights are fun and challenging. Occasionally I found there was too much inventory to deal with, but it wasn't that big a deal. The only reason I never finished this game is because I couldn't figure out where to go next, which I play a lot of Metroidvanias. Like, I can usually make my way through them or at least look up what to do next, and still I found myself absolutely stumped by this game. Would have finished it if I could have figured out where to go, but yeah, Death's Gambit is going to get a B. Depths of Sanity is by Bomb Shelter Games and it came out in 2022. This is a creepy underwater Metroidvania where you play a man in a submarine looking for his missing crew. I enjoy the controls in this game. It does feel like you're controlling a sub, so it's not the most agile thing out there, but the movement does make sense, and there are also 2 different control schemes which you can choose from. There are lots of upgrades to find, and a very satisfying user interface. The ocean is full of places to explore, and neat new creatures to discover, and there are some very creepy boss fights. This is also one of the few games where I actually loved the story. I looked forward to seeing cutscenes or getting memos from your crew, and I found everything was just very well written and the story was very engaging. The art style, not my favorite, but it does the job, and underwater music is usually awesome, and this game is no exception. Great music. I honestly think that this is one of the most underrated games on this whole list, so Depths of Sanity is getting an A. Dust: An Elysian Tale is developed by Humble Hearts and it came out in 2013. This game has beautiful art and music. It has beat-em-up combat that can get a little button mashing, but it's very fluid and gives you a lot of height. You'll just be punching things all the way up into the air. This is like a sort of Metroidvania game. There is backtracking and exploring and opening up new places with abilities, but the areas are sort of discrete areas rather than a big interconnected world. There's also just not really much reason to go back and explore once you get new abilities, because all you get is crafting stuff that you can honestly get anywhere, which makes the Metroidvania part of this game the weakest part of it. So Dust is one where, on its own, decent, but as a Metroidvania, it's a D. Ebenezer and the Invisible World is developed by Orbit Studio and Play on Worlds, and it came out in 2023. In this game, you play as Ebenezer Scrooge, and you team up with a bunch of ghosts to save the people of London. So basically, you run around and you have the choice of smacking things with your cane, which gives you mana, and you can also equip different ghosts, which all function either as damage spells or giving you new abilities like double jump and dash. I found the ghost mechanic made things feel rather clunky. There's sort of a double animation happening for each movement, like the ghost jumps, then you jump, and it makes things feel just like clunky and slow. The level design also wasn't the best, with large, kind of empty-ish areas to run through, and the save points and telepoint points were just entirely too far apart. Also, the map and the UI in general just weren't all that informative. This was like a unique idea for Metroidvania, but I didn't think it was executed all that well, so Ebenezer gets a D. Eldorand is by Mantra and Synergia Games and came out in 2023. This is a rather gory, pixelated Metroidvania with RPG elements. In this game, you can customize your skills, stats, and weapons in a way that works for you, and things generally fall into the warrior, rogue, and mage archetypes. There are also some moral decisions in this game that you make along the way, which impact the ending, as well as have some immediate effects on the world. I think the game feels good to play, and the world is fun to explore. There's more of a focus on combat than on platforming, but overall, I thought that Eldorand was a solid game, and it gets a B. Ender Lilies, Quietus of the Nights was developed by Livewire and AdGlobe, and it came out in 2021. You play a little girl who collects spirits, which do her fighting for her. They do melee and ranged attacks, as well as do support and spells. This is a game with fairly deliberate feeling combat. It also uses replenishable health potions for each fight. The map in this game isn't my favorite style, but I did find it fairly informative, and I really like that it tells you in a room if there's still anything left to collect in it. I thought the combat and the bosses could be difficult, but they were very satisfying when you finally got through them. And overall, I just loved exploring this world. I found every item either useful or interesting, and it made me want to 100% the game, so Ender Lilies gets an A. The follow-up is called Ender Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist. This is also by Livewire and AdGlobe, and this one came out in 2025. This takes everything I liked about Ender Lilies and just makes it a little bit better. This game has a very different story, a related but fairly different world. It has the same use of spirits that your character is using, but I found that there was a lot more variety and combinations to choose from. The world is even more gorgeous and even more fun to explore, with just a ton of stuff to discover, and the controls are really excellent. The map has also been much improved. I was absolutely hooked when I played through this, and played through the entire thing in a weekend until I reached 100%. Ender Magnolia gets an A+. Here's another quick close-up of all the rankings now that we are done with letter E. I'm happy to see that the A's are winning it right now. Finding Teddy 2 is developed by Storybird and Pixel Heart, and it came out in 2015. I think this game is now called Chronicles of Teddy. The title seems to change based on what system it's on. This is an interesting take on the genre. You use a series of musical notes in order to open up new areas. So as you're learning these musical notes, you're basically playing musical phrases in order to do things like unlock doors or melt blocks of ice. Overall, I thought that this was a cute puzzle platformer, and it had decent controls, and I enjoyed my time with it, so Finding Teddy is a B. Flip Witch, the Forbidden Sex Hex, is developed by Momo Games and Critical Bliss, and it came out in 2023. This is the only adult Metroidvania on the list. Here you play as a witch, out on an adventure to defeat the Chaos Witch and gain experience by seducing everyone you find. One of the main mechanics in this is gender bending. There are certain places where you can only go as either a lady or a dude, or certain blocks that will only appear to you if you're in one form or another. As you go through this world, you find people who give you quests, and they reward you by having sex with you. Complete with like animated pixel money shots. Enemies also have sex with you when you die. Honestly, in terms of things to collect in a game, sex scenes is more of an interesting reward than, a lore item. I was actually pretty surprised that this is a very good game. It controls well, it looks good, the boss fights are fun, there are lots of things and sex scenes to collect, and I had an absolute blast with this game, so Flip Witch is getting an A. Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder is by Metamorphosis Games, and it came out in 2024. This is a steampunk game inspired by 16 and 32-bit classics, where you play as a mercenary who gets into a conflict that's bigger than the ones she was expecting. This game feels really good to play. Your movement is quick, you jump high. Combat has a fun combination of building up energy with melee attacks and then using that for ranged attacks. The abilities also just fit really well with the steampunk setting, and the pixel art is gorgeous. This game is on the more linear side. There is reason to backtrack, and the areas are interconnected to a point, but there's a definite path through the game. My biggest complaint about this game is that it's just way too talky. People have far too much to say, and there's a little bit too much backstory for my taste. However, overall, it is a fun, short, and fairly easy experience that I enjoyed, so Gestalt is getting a B. Gestalt? Gestalt. Someone's gonna correct me. Ghost 1.0 is developed by Unepic Fran, and this one came out in 2016. You play as a robot going through a facility, and your interesting ability is that you can ghost out of your body and take over other robots. Honestly, not a huge fan of this game. Everything looks kind of the same. You're not really encouraged to explore because you buy most of your upgrades as opposed to finding them. There is a locked-in battle room every few rooms, it seems, and I did find that kind of annoying. The controls are mediocre, and when you die, you lose all of your upgrade currency and you don't have the option to get it back, which is honestly pretty fucking frustrating. I also find that the dialogue and the humor is not at all my style, so Ghost 1.0 is in the D rank. Grime was developed by Cloverbyte, and it came out in 2021. This is another Souls-like Metroidvania where you play a stone man with a black hole for a head. This game has a parry-like ability called Absorb, and though I'm usually not a big fan of parries, I did really like it in this game. It does an absorb, which not only prevents you from taking damage, but also deals damage to the enemy and steals their breath. You gain new abilities and traits from defeating enemies, sort of going along with the breath stealing thing. There's a lot of customization you can do for your character. Also, when you put on new equipment, it actually reflects in the game, which I really love, that little visual touch. The combat is an interesting mix of managing your stamina, your mana, and your health, and there are some very, very cool boss fights, that also make use of the various traversal abilities that you're getting through the game. Platforming, also top-notch and gets quite difficult towards the end of the game, and the world, I just love it visually, aesthetically. It's very unique, disturbing, and surreal, and Grime is getting an A+. Guacamelee is by Drinkbox Studios, and it came out in 2014. This is a beat-em-up that plays with switching between the land of the living and the land of the dead. You play a luchador, and the story is honestly very silly and very referential. Swapping between the worlds makes for some very challenging platforming segments and can also make things a little bit on the puzzly side. I do find this game is definitely one of the more linear Metroidvanias, and I didn't find exploration that rewarding. It's mostly coins that you get to buy power-ups. However, overall, I really liked the world, the platforming challenges, and the humor, and it controls well, so Guacamelee is getting a B. Guacamelee 2 is also by Drinkbox Studios. It came out in 2018. This game plays very similar to Guacamelee 1, it just feels a little bit better all around. I played this one in co-op, and the swapping worlds again is a big standout here, which can make for some deviously challenging platforming segments in terms of handling that world swapping with the second player. This game is still on the linear side for a Metroidvania, but I still found it a lot of fun, so Guacamelee is getting a B+. Outfit change, as I am on to day 2 of filming this video. Maybe I play too many video games. Hack is developed by Bling Game and it came out in 2022. This has a sort of cyberpunky setting and you play a guy who's looking for his lost brother. This is a platforming heavy game. It feels very good to control. The world is sort of an overworld with discrete dungeons, but those dungeons themselves are very windy and interconnected, and you're given plenty of reason to backtrack through previous ones throughout the story. These levels do get very complex and even a little bit puzzly. I often found myself having a little bit of trouble figuring out where to go next. The combat, I feel like, is a little bit of a weak point. There aren't too many bosses, but they're all sort of just okay for me. And I do find it is a little too talky for my tastes. However, I still think that this is an overall pretty solid game, so Hack is going to get a B. Haiku the Robot is by Mr. Morris Games and it released in 2022. This is a very concise, enjoyable game. You play as a little robot going through a mechanical world trying to find all of its secrets. The abilities that you get aren't overly novel, but it controls well, has good exploration, a good map, and it's just a nice fun time. I don't usually enjoy Game Boy-inspired graphics, however, I do like the visuals in this game a lot. Nothing in particular about this game stands out as outstanding, but it just does everything really well, so Haiku the Robot is getting a B+. Headlander is developed by Double Fine and it came out in 2016. It has a sort of retro-futuristic aesthetic. You play as a floating head who goes around this space station and it can connect to various other robot bodies, which is what gives you your abilities to explore new areas. This game is more on the puzzly side, and I did find some of the puzzling to figure out how to get where I needed to go a little bit on the challenging side. I also found that the boss fights were lots of fun. It's mostly ranged combat, and the bosses were also pretty amusing just to look at and the things they were saying. Overall, I think this is a very cool and unique game, and it is a B. Hollow Knight is developed by Team Cherry, and it came out in 2017. And I'll be honest, it took me a couple tries to really get into Hollow Knight, but once I did, I really got into it. This is my favorite Metroidvania. I think the controls are perfect. The combat mechanics are fairly simple, but the bosses really make you master those simple mechanics. The platforming also feels amazingly smooth and is fun, and introduces some really devious challenges later in the game. The map is vast and full of secrets. Very little makes me feel better than knocking down a wall and opening up a shortcut that'll make getting somewhere easier the next time. I just found the entire map just an absolute joy to explore. Characters in the game are charming and they add to the world without ever talking too much. This is really one of the only games that's ever made me want to speedrun or go for certain more difficult achievements. That's not usually what I'm into. And anytime someone I like talks about Hollow Knight, I just want to start a new game of Hollow Knight. So this is obviously an S rank. Iconoclasts is by Joachim Sandberg and it came out in 2017. This is really more of a puzzle action game. It does definitely have that ability gating, but it is quite on the linear side. There's a lot of dialogue and story that I wasn't particularly interested in, and some levels go so incredibly hard on the puzzles. Boss fights were also more about puzzles than, platforming challenge or anything. I feel like this is an alright puzzle game, but Iconoclast is not a very good Metroidvania, so it gets a D. Infernax is by Berserk Studio and it came out in 2022. This is another game that feels very inspired by Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. You are a knight returning to your kingdom to find that it has become overrun by monsters, but you get to choose. Do you want to help your people or do you want to become evil yourself? There's a lot of fun, gory visuals as you explore the dungeons. This does definitely have some old school kind of difficulty with knockbacks and death pits. There are options for how you want the difficulty and the saving to be, making it more or less punishing, which is definitely very much appreciated. Overall, this is a pretty straightforward throwback game that I found quite fun, so Infernax is another B. Islets is another game by Kyle Thompson, and this one came out in 2022. You play a little mouse who is out to reconnect a series of islands that have become overrun by monsters and have all separated. What I really like about this one is that it switches things up between your basic 2D action platforming and has some segments where you're participating in bullet hell type shooters as you fly in your flying airship. The map is very fun to explore, and it's really satisfying when you start connecting the islands and seeing that map come together and interconnect even more. Kyle Thompson just makes very pleasant, comfy games. I like the art, I like the characters and the dialogue, and the gameplay just feels good. My only real complaint here is that I wish there were more bullet hell segments, but it's still a great game without more of them, and Islets gets an A+. Journey to the Savage Planet was developed by Typhoon and it came out in 2021. This is a 3D Metroidvania. You arrive on a planet and you're trying to tame it and find out its secrets. This game has funny FMV commercials that you see as you play the game, and I always appreciate FMV in a video game. Exploring the planet and platforming is a lot of fun as you get new abilities that let you grapple and boost your way around the island, or planet. Combat, on the other hand, while it was okay, could get a bit annoying and felt like it got in the way of the exploration. You also can't pause the game for some reason, which is really fucking dumb. But overall, I thought this was a decent game that I had fun with, so Journey to the Savage Planet gets a B. Night Witch is by Super Mega Team and it came out in 2022. This is a twin-stick bullet hell Metroidvania that uses a card system for spells. I think this is a really good idea, but I don't particularly like how it was executed. I find the general movement speed way too slow and it makes backtracking kind of a pain. It also seemed like the level designs and the enemy projectiles were very random and hard to predict. The spell system also feels very random. You get 3 random spell cards assigned to different face buttons, and when you use one, you pull another card, which means like 1 minute the X button could be a heal, and the next minute the X button is a triple shot, so it makes it very difficult to really learn what the controls are. Overall, I just did not find the Night Witch any fun at all, so I'm giving it a D. La Mulana is a game by Nagoro and it came out in 2013, and it is very difficult to rank this game and its sequel. They're games that I love the idea of so much, but I like playing them way less than I would want to. You play an archaeologist and you're going into ruins that are filled with traps and riddles and things that want to kill you. A lot of the challenge is in figuring out things to do, and you will definitely need a notebook for this one. This is just a very challenging and punishing game. Not only are the riddles punishing, but the controls are pretty rudimentary. There are lots of traps that can instantly kill you. Important items are difficult to miss. I have tried this game a few times and I can never get too far, so La Mulana 1 is going to go in C, just because I love the idea of it so much, even if I can't play it much myself. And then La Mulana 2, basically the same thing. This one came out in 2018, but it's just a little bit more accessible than the first one. It is still a combination of punishing gameplay and obtuse puzzles though, but it's just a little friendlier. I would love to play more of this game, and I probably will at some point. This one is going to get a B. The Last Case of Benedict Fox was developed by Plot Twist, and it came out in 2023, and you play a detective with a demon in his head. This is a very sort of pulpy, noir-style game, and it combines puzzles with combat and platforming. I really like the aesthetic of noir pulp and demons, but I didn't really like much else. The jumps are floaty, the double jump is somehow difficult to time, and the combat feels clunky and imprecise. There are long load times, which makes things pretty frustrating, and the map really leaves something to be desired, and it makes it difficult to know where you're supposed to go next. So Last Case of Benedict Fox is getting a D. The next game is The Last Faith. This is by Kumi Souls Games from 2023, and this is another Souls-like with a deliciously gothic atmosphere. You travel around an absolutely gorgeous pixel art world, fighting and executing enemies, gaining Nycrux, which works to upgrade all of your various functions and buy things. There is a good weapon assortment to use, everything from big, slow two-handers to quicker, long-ranged whips or guns. There are also a lot of spells to get to augment your combat abilities. You have a manor that you get to build up, you find people out in the world, and you invite them back with you, and they can help you in your quest in some way. I really like this game's very cool and challenging boss fights, and I loved exploring the world, and it's one that definitely made me want to 100% it. Last Faith gets an A+. Lone Fungus is by Basti Games, and it came out in 2023. In this, you play as a little mushroom dude who is exploring underground. The map is quite expansive, and I did find it very fun to explore. The abilities that you get are interesting, though I did find they got a little overly complex. There are lots of very challenging, usually optional platforming sections that have very complicated inputs. You jump, then kick off the wall, then spin dash off the ceiling, and then hit a block, and they just felt like I was playing Finger Twister, so I had to skip most of these. Also, an annoyance in this, you cannot pause your game during a boss fight, which, why? But overall, I thought that Lone Fungus was a solid game, and it is getting a B. Mars 2120 was developed by Qbyte Interactive, and it came out in 2024. This is a game that's very clearly inspired by Metroid Dread. You're on Mars, you're given practically no introduction about who you are or why you're here, you just have to figure it out as you go. A couple cool things is that you have both melee and ranged combat options, and your abilities are based on different elements which interact with the world in different ways. However, that's really all I have nice to say about this game, as everything else was pretty bad and it didn't really feel like this game was ready for release. The controls are very janky. It's hard to target things with range, but the hitboxes when you attack things with melee are a little bit unpredictable. Enemies either charge right into you, or just sit back flying in the sky for you to shoot at them, or they get stuck in the terrain. The character movement feels alright, but most of the levels are so tight and compact that you don't actually get to make use of your cool double jump and stuff. It also has a very strange way of upgrading where you get XP all the time, but you have to actually find the ability to upgrade something in the world before you can use your XP on it, meaning that for the first couple hours I was just drowning in XP with nothing to use it on. The boss fights seem like there's only really one way to beat most of them, and I also just think this is kind of an eyesore in terms of visuals. So Mars 2120 is going in F. Just take a look at the whole list here so you can see it a bit more clearly and you can actually see the F tier. The Messenger is by Sabotage, and it came out in 2018. This starts out as a 2D action platformer, which is a very good and very fun 2D action platformer. The movement is smooth and it's very fun to control. And then a couple hours in, it opens up and turns into a bad Metroidvania. Despite the fact that moving around still feels nice, the world is not fun to explore, the map is uninteresting, The levels are long and linear with very few interconnections, and backtracking just feels like a chore. You're also mostly doing fetch quests as you get all of your movement abilities in that first part of the game. The bosses are fun, but still the getting around and moving through the world is really not. So Messenger, good 2D action platformer, bad Metroidvania, so it's going in D. Metroid Dread was developed by Mercury Steam and it came out in 2021. This is one of the few AAA Metroidvanias that we get. Everyone was very excited about it, but for me, this is one of the biggest mixed bags of a game on the list. The movement feels great. Samus is very quick and she's very smooth to control. The boss fights are generally fun and I really like most of the abilities you get, but the map sucks. It's just segmented into different areas that you have to take elevators / very long loading screens between, which really breaks up the flow of things. You're rarely allowed to backtrack, and a lot of the time, if you pass by an obstacle, it will then close off the way behind you, so backtracking is pretty much impossible. The pace at which the abilities are introduced feels very rushed, especially near the end of the game. At one point, you get a new ability, you use it a couple times, and then you get another ability that completely supersedes it. The art and the music are also really nothing memorable, and the Emmys are terrible and definitely the worst part of the game. So for me, Metroid Dread is a mediocre C. Micetopia is by Ninja Rabbit Studios and it came out in 2022. In this, you play a cute little mouse in a nice pixel art world, but there's just really nothing to this game. There's only really 2 environments, a cave and a forest, and there's very few enemy types. You jump a few times, you smack some things, you find some mice, and then the game is just over. It's just kind of boring and basic, and there's not a whole lot to say about it. Micetopia is a D. Mini Shoot Adventures is by Soul Game Studio, and this one came out in 2024. This is a twin-stick shooter that combines an open overworld with interconnected dungeons and bullet hell boss fights. I found this game very charming. It has simple but effective graphics with nice visuals and little audio flourishes. There's a good variety of abilities to upgrade. It is very non-linear and you can tackle the various dungeons and bosses in very different orders, and it's just very rewarding to explore. This game feels like it's doing something new with its variety of influences, but it also feels very familiar and cozy, and I really loved this one, so Mini Shoot Adventures is an A+. Mobius Machine is by Madruga Works and it came out in 2024. In this, you are an astronaut who gets a distress call and you end up exploring a very hostile alien world. This is more of a run and gun. It has ranged combat and you get a variety of different guns as well as different power-ups for them. The exploration is really a big focus here, and the environments are usually more dangerous to you than the actual enemies are. Most abilities that you get will help you deal with the terrain in some way. This game even has a really fun water level, and usually water levels are but this one is excellent. I do wish that there were more boss fights in the game, as they are fairly minimal, and the areas do start to look a little bit samey after a little while, but overall I found that this was a solid game, so Mobius Machine gets a B. Monster Boy in the Cursed Kingdom was developed by Game Atelier and it came out in 2019. This is a very colorful and adorable game. The main mechanic is that you get access to new forms as you go. You can start as a boy and you can turn into a snake or a dragon or a lion or a pig, and each has a different ability that will help you traverse the world and do combat in some way. The map is very good and there are lots of secrets to find. It is very heavy on the puzzles. It sort of seems to get heavier and heavier on them as the game goes on. I started out really liking them and then I ended up getting a little bit fatigued by the puzzles, but overall I thought this was a good game and Monster Boy is going in B. Monster Sanctuary is by Moirai Games and it came out in 2020. This is a combination of Metroidvania and monster battler a la Pokemon. You go through the world as a 2D platformer, collecting monsters and building them into a party where you use them to do sort of turn-based JRPG style combat. These monsters can also give you new abilities though, like if you have a fish, it can help you swim underwater. If you have a bird, it can let you float. So these are how you get through the various areas, getting new abilities, and exploring more as you go. I found that combat in this game got pretty tough by the end, but overall I really enjoyed it, and I just thought that this was a very nice spin on the genre, so Monster Sanctuary gets a B+. Moonlight Pulse is by Seafloor Games and it released in 2024. In this, you play as 4 different characters. You're living inside of a giant turtle and you're trying to keep it alive against an invasion. Each of the 4 different characters have different combat and movement abilities that you'll need. The fun and a lot of the challenge comes from switching between the characters. Sometimes you'll even need to switch characters mid-jump in order to get somewhere you need to go. I like the pixel art, I enjoyed the platforming, and the bosses are a lot of fun as well. My biggest complaint about this one is the fast travel system. You go through the turtle's circulatory system, which makes very nice narrative sense, but if you make a mistake and get off at the wrong point or click in the wrong direction, you will really go off in the wrong direction, and backtracking to where you actually want to go is a bit of a pain in the ass. However, I still think that Moonlight Pulse was a very good game that I very much enjoyed, so it is getting a B+. The Mummy Demastered is by Way Forward and it came out in 2017. I feel like this is one of the games that really started getting me into the genre. This is a good game based on what is apparently a pretty bad movie, so it was a kind of nice surprise. This is a very Metroid-style game. It's more of a run and gun where you get a wide variety of weapons and are always picking up ammo for them. The map is simple but effective. It's your basic grid-style map that is fairly fun to explore. And this game is on the shorter side, but it definitely kept me engaged throughout. My one major complaint about this game is that it has one of the meanest death mechanics. When you die, you drop all your stuff, like all your guns, all your abilities, and you have to fight your corpse to get it back, but your corpse still has all the stuff. So that could go very poorly for you, but it didn't cause me enough trouble to really bother me that much, so Mummy Demastered gets an A. Ori and the Blind Forest is by Moon Studios and it came out in 2015. This is also one of the games that really got me into the genre, and this game has some of the most beautiful art in any Metroidvania. It also has an emotionally affecting story. The best thing about the Ori games is definitely the movement. It is so fluid and it has such a nice focus on platforming. This one in particular has fairly light combat. It's pretty basic what you want to do, but it really excels in things like chase sequences, which I absolutely love. This game is a little bit more on the linear side, but I think Ori is a very strong game. So Ori and the Blind Forest is an A. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a follow-up by Moon Studios from 2020, and this game has the same gorgeous art, music, and wordlessly emotional storytelling that the first one did. It also expands things significantly in introducing a much more interesting combat system with various weapons to use and a lot more boss fights. There is also a hub world that you get to build up as you go, which I always enjoy doing in a game, and it still has excellent platforming and chase sequences. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is an A+. Owlboy is by D-Pad Studios and it came out in 2016. This game kind of borders on Metroidvania or not. It is quite linear, though you do open up new areas with new abilities as you go. Overall, I enjoyed the gameplay of this generally, but I found that there was very little reason to explore or backtrack to collect things. This is a decent game on its own, but the map and secrets and linearity make it a pretty poor Metroidvania, so Owlboy is going in D. Pampas and Celine, The Maze of Demons is developed by Unepic Fran and it came out in 2024. This is a very retro-inspired co-op Metroidvania that has you playing as a mage and a warrior as you explore a vast castle. I played this entirely in co-op, and it started out very good. The castle is fun to explore, there are a ton of different abilities and items that you're collecting as you go to help you progress. From a co-op point of view, it's very cool because it's online co-op, so you can each go off in a different direction to do your own thing if you want to, but you can always teleport back to each other, which is a very nice feature. It is pretty old school in its difficulty in that there are knockbacks and there's very minimal healing, but it's still very fun. However, once you get to about the halfway point in the game, it seems to forget that it's supposed to be a co-op game. There are whole dungeons and whole boss fights where one character was entirely useless and was basically just a big weight on the other player. Like, for example, once one player gets a double jump, the other character who has no double jump just can't make their way through a certain dungeon. And there's also abilities, like a boss ability that you need to blink through, and the character who can't blink just takes massive damage and gets stunned. Also, the final boss requires you to swap between characters, which is how you would play it in solo mode, and we were unable to actually finish the game on co-op. One character had to leave so that the other person could actually get the final hit on the last boss. So I thought I had finally found a game by this dev that I liked, but it really took a nosedive. It's like B+ in the first half, F in the last half, so I don't know. I guess Pampus and Celine is gonna get a C. Primal Planet is by Seething Swarm, and it came out in 2025. This is a prehistoric adventure where you play a caveman traveling a dangerous, dinosaur-filled world looking to save his family. This game combines combat, platforming with resource gathering and crafting. It generally controls really well, the world is fun to explore, it has great music, and I really like that it tells an affecting story without any words. Crafting does add something new and interesting to the game, and there are a ton of different abilities that you can purchase with your skill points as you level up. The map isn't my favorite thing, it's not particularly detailed enough, and backtracking can be a pain because the fast travel system isn't entirely effective. Overall though, I liked Primal Planet a lot, and it is getting a B. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is developed by Ubisoft Montpellier, and it came out in 2024. This is a rethinking of the Prince of Persia franchise, and it is the best Metroidvania I've played since Hollow Knight. This just does everything well. It does great at combat, great at platforming. Sargon controls so well, and it is a blast to just flow through spikes and around obstacles and around enemies. I'm not usually a parry fan, but the parry in this game is actually fun and rewarding, giving you an awesome animation as well as annihilating your enemies. There are some deviously difficult platforming segments in this game, and I really find that all of the abilities you get are delightful and even surprising at times in terms of what they are and all of the different ways that you can use them, both for platforming and for combat. Some of the boss fights are really fun, incorporating all the platforming abilities where you're barely even touching the ground. The map is fantastic, it's interconnected, it's full of secrets and challenges and cool things to find, and overall it just feels incredibly good to play. So Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is getting an S. Pronti is by 18 Light Game and Fun Zone Games, and it came out in 2021. This is an underwater Metroidvania where you play a cute little fish who is exploring Atlantis. This is a very nice looking game, and it does a good job of balancing combat with traversal challenges and some light puzzling. I'm not a huge fan of the combat system. You basically are throwing another fish like a javelin, which makes the combat feel a little too choppy and staccato for me. But overall, I thought that Pronti was a decent game, and it is getting a B. Record of Lodos War: Deed Lit in Wonder Labyrinth is a mouthful. It is by Team Ladybug, and it came out in 2021. Here, you play a character going through a very glitchy labyrinth who keeps running into people from her past. This game seems very inspired by Symphony of the Night. You look like Alucard, you move like Alucard. You get a variety of weapons to find or buy, and you can customize your playstyle to it. This game has a very cool sort of Ikaruga-like elemental mechanic where when you have the correct element equipped, you absorb attacks of that type, which makes for some very interesting boss fights. Where the game disappointed me a little bit was just in the world. The pixel art is pretty, but the castle was just a little bit bland and didn't seem all that cohesive. Still though, this was a short and sweet game that controls very nicely, and I did have a lot of fun with it. So Lodos War is going in B+. A Robot Named Fight was developed by Morningstar Game Studio and came out in 2017, and this is a roguelike Metroidvania where you get a new procedurally generated map every time you die. This is very Metroid inspired in terms of its environments and its weapons. I am just not a good enough / careful enough player to enjoy a game like this. When you die, you need to find your way through an entirely new map, get all of your abilities again, and it's just not appealing for me at all to start from nothing again every time, so A Robot Named Fight, as far as Metroidvanias go, gets a D. Romancelvania is by the Deep End Games and came out in 2023. I was very excited by the concept of this game. It combines a Metroidvania with a dating game visual novel. You play a sad, sappy Dracula who's going on a dating reality show and dating other monsters. There is some clever and amusing writing in the dating sim aspect of it, but as a 2D platformer and Metroidvania, it is just awful. The controls are janky, your character feels like it's too large for the levels that you're exploring, and I was constantly hitting my head on the ceiling or getting stuck on various terrain. There are performance issues, the game is entirely too dark and it's hard to see, and the combat is just very lightweight and there's no feeling or feedback to it. There's also no map in this game, which makes it an absolute nightmare to navigate, so Romancelvania, sadly, is going in the F category. Also, we'll stay on a quick close-up of the rankings here, since this ranking is getting unwieldy, and it looks like F is gonna get pushed off for most of the rest of this video. Shadow Complex is by Chair Entertainment and first came out in 2009. This is a 2.5D, very Metroid-inspired game. There's a lot of focus on weapons and guns, but there are also fun melee takedowns to do. There is some stealth action and a focus on interesting set pieces like taking over turrets. The world is fun to explore, there are lots of upgrades to find, and the gameplay stays fresh while it's combining various platforming, swimming, and vehicle segments. Shadow Complex is a very fun game, and it gets a B+. Sheepo is another one by Kyle Thompson. This one is from 2020. It's a very charming game where you're exploring a planet trying to find creatures to save, and you can change into different creatures that you meet along the way, which gives you new abilities. This is interesting because for the most part, this is a non-violent game that definitely focuses more on platforming. There are boss fights, but they're mostly platforming challenges and you're trying to make a boss get themselves stuck or knock themselves out. You're not actually doing any attacking. It controls very nicely and the abilities are interesting. This is a nice, short and sweet Metroidvania, and Sheepo gets a B. Song of the Deep is by Insomniac Games and it came out in 2016. This is an underwater Metroidvania where you play a girl in a submarine looking for her father who has been lost at sea. This game is definitely a little more heavy on the puzzles, but the underwater environments are very beautiful and the creatures you find are cool. The different abilities that you get make traveling the world fun, and overall I think Song of the Deep is a good game and it gets a B as well. Songbird Symphony is by Joystick Studios and it came out in 2019. In this, you are an orphan bird trying to find out where exactly you come from. This combines rhythm game with platforming. It's very cute. The platforming is alright, but as a rhythm game, I think it's pretty bad. The music and the button prompts don't really sync together. They're all over the place, and after the first couple, they just get incredibly hard because everything feels very random. You don't even have to do well to progress, but it's not fun to get to a boss and just see a mess of disorganized button prompts. Also, the level design isn't particularly great either, so Songbird Symphony is going in D. Soldiers is by Retroforge and came out in 2022. This is your average Save the Kingdom kind of game with very nice pixel art. You get to choose from 3 different classes at the beginning, like a sword and board warrior, a mage, and an archer, and they all play fairly differently. I really liked the start of this game. Everything from the movement to the combat was pretty solid. However, the further you go, the more and more drawn out everything feels. The areas are too big, the enemies have too much health, the save points are further and further and further apart. It just turns into a slog after a little while. So despite a nice beginning, Soldiers is getting a C. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is by Respawn. It came out in 2019. This is another 3D Metroidvania. And I'm pretty torn on this one because in it you go to various planets which each kind of function as their own little self-contained Metroidvania planet you explore more of as you get new abilities. And 2 of the planets are very fun to explore and have nice, useful maps, and 2 of them are not fun and they are a nightmare to navigate. So I feel like it's kind of equal amounts good and bad, so Jedi is going in C. SteamWorld Dig is by Image and Form Games and came out in 2013. In this, you play a robot who has inherited a mine that you need to explore to find out all of its secrets. You sort of dig your own path through the map, which is a really interesting idea. You find enemies, items, and little dungeons to explore in a more of a 2D platforming way. In between runs, you go into town to purchase upgrades, bank your resources, and find new quests from people. Overall, this is a very fun little game. SteamWorld Dig 1 is a B. And then SteamWorld Dig 2, which came out in 2017, takes everything from the first game and just improves on it. The combat, the abilities, the platforming are all just a little bit better than they were in the first one, so SteamWorld Dig 2 gets an A. Strider is by Double Helix Games and Capcom and came out in 2014. This series has a very long history. This one takes a sort of 2.5D approach. It has very, very fluid movement and combat. Right from the start, you feel very agile and you can basically climb everything, giving the game a ton of verticality. The combat can get a little button mashy, but overall, I really enjoyed Strider, and it is a B. Well, that B rank's getting pretty full. Sundered is by Thunder Lotus, and it came out in 2017. In this game, you are wandering through a ruined and ever-changing world. The map is set up in a way where all of the important rooms, like ability rooms, boss rooms, are in set places, but the interconnecting rooms and map in between them changes and randomizes each time you die. This game has absolutely beautiful art. There's incredible boss fights that are just gigantic and make you feel minuscule in comparison. When you get new abilities, you have the option to corrupt them or not, resulting in 2 very different sets of abilities that you can opt for as you go through the game. I played this in co-op and I had a ton of fun with it. By the end of the game, we were so powerful movement-wise, it felt like we could basically fly. I just had a lot of fun with Sundered, and it's getting an A. Super Metroid is by Nintendo, and it came out in 1994. This game has absolutely fantastic music and atmosphere, and my favorite thing about it is just the sense of isolation that it gives. It's a very pure experience, not weighed down by too much dialogue or too many items. The boss fights are fun, and the world is very interesting to explore. Some of the controls can be a little bit on the clunky side, which keeps it out of my top tier, but Super Metroid is still an A+. Superland is by Super Games and came out in 2019. This is a 3D Metroidvania, and you're just a little guy exploring a large sandbox world. This is a very puzzle-heavy game with a lot of physics-based puzzles. The exploration in this game is fantastic, and there are so many little things to find and so many secrets. There is no in-game map, which I'm not generally a fan of, but it's not as big of a problem as I would have expected. The worst part is the combat. You just go around smacking stuff with a sword, and it's really not that much fun. Most of the combat is avoidable, which is nice. However, most of the upgrades you're getting are also for combat, so there's a bit of a balance issue there. Overall, I thought the exploration and the puzzles of Superland were very good though, so Superland is a B. Tales of Kenzera Zhao is by Surgent Studios, and it came out in 2024. In this game, you are a shaman who is trying to reclaim your dead father's spirit. This is a gorgeous game with a really nice story and excellent voice acting. It feels very good right from the go as you're agile from the start. You already know how to air dash and double jump. Combat uses an interesting mask system that changes the kind of attacks and abilities that you have, and I really enjoyed the boss fights in this game, which are very interesting both mechanically and narratively. There are also some fun platforming chase sequences, which I always like. Where the game falls down, though, is in the sense of exploration. It is quite linear, and the whole map reveals itself as soon as you enter a new area, which kind of takes away any sense of exploration. I also really never felt compelled to do any backtracking, although some was available. I think that as a 2D action platformer, this is a pretty good game, whereas as a Metroidvania, it's not great, so Tales of Kenzera Zhao is going in C. Teslagrad is by Rain Games, and it came out in 2013. In this game, you're exploring a big tower, doing puzzles and platforming involving electromagnetism. I didn't like playing this game at all. It's very linear, and the map isn't that fun to explore for anything but collectibles. There's way too much momentum, so the game feels slippery, which is one of my least favorite ways for a game to feel. It's also filled with one-hit deaths that make you start from the beginning of a giant room or a beginning of a boss fight again, which I found quite frustrating, so Teslagrad is in the D category. Time Spinner is by Lunar Ray Games, and it released in 2018. This is a very Symphony of the Night inspired game. You are on a mission of revenge, and you can control time, freezing enemies to use them as platforms, as well as doing some other interesting things. In this game, you're going between two timelines. Platforming and combat are both quite good. Combat involves combining two different types of magical orbs to come up with different types of attacks. My one complaint about this game is that it's a bit too talky. I found the characters got pretty annoying. However, it is a nice, short and sweet Metroidvania, so Time Spinner is a B+. Touhou Luna Nights is by Team Ladybug and released in 2019. This is a game with some definite shoot-'em-up influences. You play like an anime girl maid exploring an interesting world. There's a little bit of puzzling involved. You have time manipulating powers in this one as well. You can freeze time as well as enemies. One of my favorite mechanics in this game is the graze mechanic. When you get really close to something that will hurt you, it increases your mana regen rate, giving you more time to use your freeze and special abilities, and this makes for some very interesting boss fights. I think the boss fights are definitely the standout in this one. Touhou Luna Nights gets an A. Twilight Monk is from Aquatic Moon Games and released in 2025. In this, you are a monk who needs to save the world. This game combines an overworld map with enemies wandering around up top with interconnected dungeons. You attack with a giant heavy pillar, which you can also use to kick at enemies or use as a platform or something to weigh down switches, so it is quite a versatile weapon. And even though this game is more dungeon-based, you're given plenty of reasons to backtrack both for items and for story reasons. I think that this game is just visually stunning. I think that everything from the art to the UI just makes me feel really cozy. This game takes a lot of familiar elements and just combines them in a very nice way, so Twilight Monk is a B+. Ultros is developed by Hedok, and it came out in 2024. This is a psychedelic, time-looping gardening game. The The game was honestly a little visually overwhelming at first, but I came to appreciate it. It has very interesting mechanics relating to planting different types of seeds, which will grow to do things like create platforms or break through walls. You also get food that grows from these trees that you can use to upgrade your stats, which give you different skills. And there is the time looping aspect every time you defeat a boss or release a shaman. You do have to repeat some of your gaining of abilities after each loop, but there are things which very much speed this process up. This game was definitely good enough to make me want to finish it, but not enough to make me want to jump through all the hoops for the good ending, so Ultros is a B. Unepic is another game by Unepic Fran, and this one came out in 2014. In this, you play a guy who's playing a tabletop role-playing game, and then you find yourself teleported into a real dungeon. There are lots of RPG mechanics. You're gaining XP, you're getting different items and weapons. It's fairly light on the Metroidvania aspects. I am not a fan of this game. I find the dialogue and humor just incredibly bad. I just cringed anytime anyone spoke. The camera in the game while you're playing is zoomed out so far that it makes it difficult to see what you're actually doing. I didn't think the controls were very good, and it's cumbersome to switch between items you're using. Honestly, I just had zero fun in the time I had with this game. Unepic is an F. Unsighted is developed by Studio Pixelpunk, and it came out in 2021. This is a more top-down, dungeon-based game. You play an automaton who is powered by a source called Anima, and Anima is running out, meaning all of your automaton friends are at risk of turning into mindless monsters. You need to decide how to spend your resources in this game. You get items that can prolong people's lives, but you only have so much of it. And each character can help you out in some way, but once they're turned into a monster, they're lost forever. I really like this kind of time-based stress in a game, though you can turn the timing element off if that's not your thing. Overall, though, I just found this game had very exciting platforming and combat, including a parry that I actually liked. It's full of new abilities and shortcuts. It's the kind of game that wants to be played more than once because you learn it, you go through it faster, you save more people, though I was happy with just my single playthrough that I did. Unsighted is a very good game, and it gets an A. Alright, we've pushed the F off the screen, but we're just gonna deal with it. Vernal Edge is by Hello Penguin Team, and it came out in 2023. In this, you are on a quest for revenge, and you have an airship that lets you travel between floating islands. I found this game a little bit directionless, especially right at the very beginning. It made the island setup a little bit annoying. I didn't know which island I had to go through, so just hopping through each of them looking for something wasn't that much fun. The game does have some fast pace and fairly decent platforming, although they're a touch on the slippery side in terms of controls. I didn't find the combat very fun, though. Every enemy was very spongy, and you need to charge up attacks in order to destroy shields on pretty much everything. This is also a big series of locked-in combat rooms that just get tedious, honestly. So Vernal Edge is a D. Wonder Boy in Monster World is by Westone Entertainment, and it released in 1991. This predates Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night, but definitely has those Metroidvania elements. It combines adventuring through towns and talking to people with getting new gear. There are lots of secret areas to access as you get new items or abilities. It's not the most interesting world to explore, but it is a decent game. The Metroidvania aspects, honestly just okay, so Wonder Boy is going in C. Zeo Drifter is made by Renegade Kid, and it released in 2014. This is a very mini Metroidvania. It only takes maybe 3 hours to beat. It is very, very basic. There are basically 4 different planets to explore, maybe a boss fight, and you get a new ability on each of them, and you need to jump back and forth between the planets as you get new abilities. For such a short game, it's incredibly repetitive. Each planet's map is very small. There's really only one single boss model. It just gets a new ability each time you face it. There's also only a single height for the jump, which makes things way more awkward than I would have expected, but it does make them awkward. Similarly, controls a little bit on the slippery side. One thing I really liked about this game was that there's a phase shift ability that lets you shift between the foreground and the background of a level, which was an interesting idea that I really liked. However, that does not save Xeodrifter from going indie. Yoku's Island Express is by Villa Gorilla and it released in 2018. In this game, you play as a postman trying to help all of the locals, and this is a pinball Metroidvania. You get to meet cute characters and choose your own path through this interconnected world. There's lots to connect as you bounce and ricochet off everything. Honestly, it's a very charming game, though I eventually got tired of backtracking. You know, sometimes you just want to run and jump, and having to figure out angles and everything for bouncing got a little tiresome, but Yoku's Island is still a very cute game and a good idea, and it's getting a B. And the last game that I am ranking is Zappling Bygone. This is by Nine Finger Games and released in 2022. And in this game, you're a weird little alien who murders your foes and wears their skulls in order to take their abilities. You have gooey, sticky tentacles, so there's a lot of climbing and swinging around that feels rather good. It is peppered with comic book style images for the storytelling. I thought that the backtracking in this game got a little bit tedious as it wasn't always clear where to go, and the teleports and the save points are fairly far apart. However, overall, I thought that this was a solid game, and Zappling Bygone gets our final B. So here we are with the final rankings for all 104 Metroidvanias that I have played and ranked. I like this fairly even distribution of things. As I said, anything in a B and above, I definitely recommend people to play. Even some of the C's or even D's, I think they will definitely have an audience of people. It just wasn't for me. But before I wrap this up, because this video isn't long enough already, I just wanted to mention about another dozen games. These are games that I played and bounced off very quickly. I don't feel like I've given them enough time to give them a spot on the ranking. However, I have thoughts about them, and I know I get a million, what about this game? What about this game? So here's the whatabouts. First, Bow, Path of the Teal Lotus. This is a fairly recent game. Very nice art style. What I don't like is that you are pogoing everywhere. I don't mind a pogo like in Hollow Knight, but in here, rather than a double jump, you literally have to pogo off everything. The earliest, simplest level, you're pogoing just to jump up to a mid-sized platform. I just found it was like too much effort just to do the basics of the game, and I stopped playing. Next, Fist Forged in Shadow Torch. This is a very melee-heavy game. I think you play as a rabbit in power armor. I thought this was alright. It was a little zoomed in, and every screen was like, I felt like we were going through screens so fast, like they were very small. I thought this was fine. The real reason I stopped playing it is that it left Game Pass, and I didn't like it enough to buy it, so never finished it. Ghost Song is another one that at first glance looked like a very cool update to Super Metroid. It has a fun system of melee combat where you can melee things, or where you shoot things. It heats up your gun, and then you can do like a super heated melee attack, which I thought was really neat. However, I found that the areas were just way too long and spread out. The enemies were way too spongy. The travel was long. It just felt like a very drawn out game. Laika Age Through Blood is a cool game with an interesting art style, a story I actually was interested in, but I just couldn't wrap my head around the bike controls. You're just spinning on your bike, doing jumps and shooting things, and I just felt like it required too much brain and finger dexterity 100% of the time, and it was just a little too stressful for me. Metroid Prime, I've tried it a couple times, just can't get into it. It may be because it's on Switch and I never pick up my Switch, but yeah, I can't really get into the first person or the scanning of everything. Moonscars looked interesting, but I found it incredibly punishing. This is a game where every time you die, things get harder, and that's not fun. As I said before, I'm not a very careful or patient player, so being punished that much every time I died was just not for me. Nine Souls had a brilliant opening, but this is one of the games that makes me hate parrying. In all the games I've mentioned where I liked it, it felt rewarding in some way. In this game, when you pull off a parry, your only reward is not dying and getting to parry again forever. So I did not like Nine Souls. 9 Years of Shadows is a very pretty game, but it had a very weird system for where your health and your shield and your mana was all in like one combined bar that was very difficult to manage or keep track of. Bounced off that one. Out Buddies DX. I wanted a co-op game, and it's not really a great co-op game. The second player is definitely an afterthought. Phanatopia Awakening. I've heard so many people say such great things about this game, but the opening is just so boring. You're just in a little town with too many people to talk to who have nothing interesting to say, and the combat at the beginning of the game is also not exciting. There was just like nothing to hook me in to make me want to play more. Ribby Rabby or Rabby Ribby with the little bunny girls honestly looks kind of cool. I think the only reason I haven't played more is because I never pick up my Switch, but I've started it a couple times and then I've always just forget about it. Salt and Sanctuary is definitely more of a 2D Souls game. The Metroidvania elements seem fairly light, and the fact that there was no map made it difficult for me to get through and wasn't really something I was interested in. And finally, Void Rot is another newer one, and I found your character had far too much momentum and I was slipping off of platforms everywhere, so I put that one down as well. Alright, I am done talking about Metroidvanias for now. Thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end of this very, very long video. Leave me a comment and let me know what your favorite Metroidvanias are, if there are any that are not included on this list that you think that I would like to play, or if you discovered anything new from this list and you're planning to try it out yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. If you want to see more, I do have full reviews on about 20 of the games that I talked about in this video. I will leave that playlist for you to check out. I have a Patreon if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.